Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of the Middle West podcast. I'm your host. I'm not your episode, I'm your host, Thaqib Musa. With me is my co-host, Asad Hussain.
Assalamu alaikum.
And we're joined by a very special guest, Brother Azhar Qayum.
Assalamu alaikum.
So Azhar is the MEND regional manager for the West Midlands. For all of the Midlands, not just the West. Okay.
East and West.
Alhamdulillah. And also he's been involved with media work, with campaigning against Islamophobia, and basically been at the front lines of the fight against Islamophobia for many years, from MAB, from different organizations. And so we're very pleased to have you. Jazakallah khair. So we wanted to get your insight a little bit into Islamophobia, some of the work you've done, some of your insights into the Muslim community around the country, but also talk a little bit about your life. How did Azhar Qayum become the man that we know today, and what was the journey and the motivations that inspired you to start off? So you're born and bred Brummy, right?
Brummy, yeah, all the way.
Alhamdulillah, is it? So it's like Asad, but Asad defected away to the north.
Yeah, I migrated to the north for a better life.
Really?
On a rubber dinghy, yes. No, I still have a Birmingham still has a special place in my heart.
At least you're not a Londoner who thinks anything
outside of London is just terrible. Yeah.
But alhamdulillah, okay, so you started off in Birmingham, and then you went to university. Were you involved in any stuff while you were in your early days, your high school years?
Yeah, so I got involved in the Young Muslims.
Yes, that's illustrious.
I did, yeah, a long time ago. So we're talking early 90s here.
So you know, like Dr. Zaid Pervez and all.
Oh yeah, all of those guys. So from the age of about 16, I was doing the university college circuit, giving khutbahs and stuff. Yeah, in Birmingham. So yeah, I got involved, and then I sucked stuff after that.
Okay, this was all pre-prevent.
Oh yeah, we're talking 1994. You know, we were the good Asians then, and the community under attack at the time was the poor African Caribbean community, who everybody was accusing of anything under the sun, and all of Asians, Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus were all considered to be the sort of like, you know, the good minority, as it were.
Yeah, the model immigrant community.
The model immigrant community that was, you know.
When do you think that kind of target changed and switched towards the Muslims as a punching bag? It took a while. So the initial spotlight coming on the Muslims was the Salman Rushdie affair. Okay,
but that sort of
was
dissipated.
97, right?
Earlier, I think, was it not? But I can't remember. 1997, say. I can't remember quite when it was now. But that was the initial little, and then what you had was the first Gulf War. That was earlier. So
that was
the
91,
other way, yeah. So the first Gulf War, I think 87 was the.
Oh right.
Rushdie affair. I think it was even earlier. Yeah, I was very young during that, so it must have been earlier. So then it was the first Gulf War, which again sort of started putting some suspicion on the Muslim communities. But I think 9/11 was the big one.
Yeah.
As soon as 9/11 happened, suddenly the
world
world
is 89.
89, yeah, earlier.
Because we like to refer to things as post and pre 9/11 now, don't we?
Yeah. So
reality started at 9/11.
Of course, yeah.
That's what one of the US senator who said that history for us is the beginning for modern history begins at 9/11 onwards.
Well, this is the thing. People like to start history where it suits them.
Yeah.
So, a lot of Western media outlets, etc., like to start history at 9/11 because it puts them in the light as them being attacked, etc. But then, if you look back a little bit before then, you had the Gulf War, you had Western armies sat in Saudi Arabia, and all of these sort of things. So, you had the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict and things like this. So, history doesn't start wherever it's most convenient for you. We had colonialism before then, so there's so much that is fed into everything that is happening now, and we have to look at history in its entirety and not just sort of find an arbitrary date to start it from.
I think looking at history in a context that suits you, kind of it decontextualizes history, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's when your kind of career started, and then I'm assuming so when you were in university and that it was starting to get more and more difficult, but it wasn't quite. Muslims weren't quite the punching bag yet. And then Would you say 9/11 was still a big kind of turning point in your life, or?
Not necessarily in my life. So look, I've been involved in Islamic activity before and after, and I carried on doing much similar stuff to what I was doing pre and post. But I think for the Muslim community and how we've been perceived, it's been a sea change since then, and it's only got worse with time. I mean, the London bombings, have made it worse. But I think in that whole period, there's been so much more of a focus on the Muslim community. So you've got and you've had an Islamophobia industry which has sprung up. So you've got people like the Henry Jackson Society. You've got people like Douglas Murray and these guys who are there, who day and night researching Islam, Muslims, our organizations, finding any little crack that they can point at and say, look, there, extremism. People like Majid Nawaz and these guys who've popped up, Ed Hussein, people who are well funded and who are targeting Muslim organizations, which themselves are not very well funded, don't really have the resources, and are not that social media savvy, not that media savvy, and the individuals within them will mess up from time to time. But then on the other side, they've got this whole machine that's there to just point at every tiny mistake that any person within those organizations makes. So that's a big difference. I mean, I think in the 1990s, you could grow up, get involved in activism, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old, get involved in activism, make some mistakes early on, learn your lessons, grow up, mature, and it's not going to affect you in the rest of your life. It's not the social media age where everything is on record for the whole world to see. There isn't this huge machine that's got a spotlight on you. Whereas now, a 17-year-old Muslim activist who, on an off day says one little thing that, they might regret the next day or a year later or 6 months later. It's now recorded, on their social media platforms. You've probably got some researcher from some right-wing think tank that's going to troll their social media because they're part of Forces or they're part of YM or they're part of MAB or MEND or UKIM or something. And then that's it. Here we go. We found this extremist. Whereas it's actually just a young person who might have said something out of sorts, and that's the thing. I think I feel sorry for young people who are growing up.
I think the internet
now in this internet age,
both a blessing and a curse.
But it's both the internet and it's also the Islamophobia industry, which is ready to pounce at any moment on any wayward sentence that comes out of a Muslim's mouth.
So what's the Islamophobia industry that we're talking about? What's the motivation behind them? Are they kind of? Do you think there's actually people like Rupert Murdoch or those big time not financial, I mean media moguls? Do they actually have an anti-Islamic agenda tied in, or are we just an easy punching bag? And
it's probably they're both. Look, Islam sells. Stories on Islam sell. So, for example, Princess Diana, when she was alive, sold papers. Newspaper editors knew that if they put Princess Diana's picture on the front cover, that day sales would go up. So they would put it on the front cover as much as possible. And a lot of times ridiculous, it started off with the sort of Princess Diana, the darling, who looked so good, and then it turned into Princess Diana, the woman who's trying to destroy our royal family. Yeah, and I think similarly with the Muslim community, on the one hand, it feeds into people's ready-held suspicions that they now have about Islam and Muslims, and therefore it sells newspapers, it sells journals, etc. But at the same time, there are people who run those newspapers who have an anti-Islamic agenda. So, and I think Rupert Murdoch's definitely one of them. You can see you don't have. There was a stat that came out in the last couple of days of 2,800 and something. Anti-Islamic articles in his media outlets. Now, you don't get that many accidentally.
Was that the Australian one?
Yeah. Do you see the figure? Yeah. In the British print media, for example, so that's all our newspapers. For every one positive mention of Islam and Muslims, there's 21 negative, not even positive or moderate mention of Islam and Muslims. There's 21 negative articles. And that was from a Lancaster University survey where they looked at over 200,000 articles in the British print media. Now, 1 to 21 ratio isn't an accident. that's an agenda. And that's something that we have to really think about. And there's a lot of structural things that we need to think about changing. But in terms of the problem, it's there. Why is Islamophobia growing? Because you have this massive information which is anti-Islamic. That's print media. I'll give you another example. Demos did a survey, and they said that there is 400 individual pieces of Islamophobic content that appears on social media in Britain every day. 400 individual pieces of Islamophobic content on social media per day in Britain. Now, that's unsustainable. If we have this amount of constant stuff coming at us as a community, people will start to have Islamophobic ideas, because all they see about Islam and Muslims is all this negativity.
Yeah, but also on the negative side, if you're a young Muslim growing up and you just open your Twitter feed or social media, and you see so much hate directed at you, surely that kind of messes you up a bit or makes you feel, because one of the big things that we talk about is Muslims and Muslim Brits don't feel British, or they do feel British, but they don't feel accepted. So they say, this is my home, this is all I've known, but actually the media is telling me everybody around me hates me.
But even that is a media fallacy.
Yeah, so, because it's not true.
Well, no, I'm talking about this whole Muslims feeling non-British. So there is research that's been done, which shows actually the group within British society who is most loyal to Britain and most feels that they're British is the Muslim community out of all religious communities. Yeah, higher than all other communities. So actually, it's the reverse. The Muslim community in Britain, because of all sorts of reasons, actually feels Muslim and British, but is accused of being this fifth column. But at the same time, I take your point that it can be really difficult for to be Muslim and British at times, where where every time you open your Twitter feed or you go onto Facebook or you just walk past a newsstand, even you just see this negativity about Islam and about Muslims just constantly, and it's not just newspapers, it's not just social media, it's actual senior politicians in this country. So we had Zach Goldsmith, who ran the Conservative Party campaign against Sadiq Khan for mayor, in which he conflated Sadiq Khan with terrorism non-stop throughout that campaign. And everybody considered that to be Islamophobic. Lots of people shunned him because of it. But he's still there. He's still part of the Tory party. And just a couple of days ago, he went on a Twitter tirade against the APPG, the all-party parliamentary group, on British Muslims' definition of Islamophobia. Now, if you've got senior politicians who can't even accept a definition on Islamophobia, then we have a problem. We've got Boris Johnson, who was talking about Muslim women in niqab as letterboxes and bank robbers. And it's not just the Conservative Party. You've got Sarah Champion inside the Labour Party, who's an MP for the Labour Party from, I think, your neck of the woods, actually. Rotherham, Rochdale, one of the northern towns. I think it's Rotherham, yeah. Manchester Mill towns, they all blend into one for me.
Well, Rochdale produced Sajid Javid for us, so Rochdale is on the
Well, Sajid Javid's from Bromsgrove, MP at the moment, so it's unfortunate.
He was born in Rochdale.
Born in Rochdale, okay, so it's all from the mill towns. But Sarah Champion has been on this constant thing where she's conflating the Pakistani community with grooming gangs, where and taking paedophilia, cutting it until you get to a subset of a subset of a subset, and saying, oh, look, Pakistanis might be overrepresented here. But we need to look at paedophilia as a whole. And actually, no community is overrepresented within that. And it's a purposeful attempt by some politicians to say Pakistanis are responsible for grooming, Pakistanis are responsible for paedophilia. And you could not say that about almost any other community in this country. You couldn't make a claim that a particular crime is that community based and get away with it. But for some reason, because it's Muslims, because it's Pakistanis,
do you feel as though the Muslim and Pakistani community have become somewhat comfortable scapegoats for politicians, where they know that if they pin a certain event on this community, there won't be as much backlash because the idea is becoming accepted, isn't it? Islamophobia within society is becoming accepted as something which may be seen as normal. And that's a scary thing, isn't it?
Baroness Warsi famously said that Islamophobia has passed the dinner table test, where an average middle-class dinner table, you could make Islamophobic comments and people wouldn't bat an eyelid. And
not on this dinner table, mate.
Not on this dinner table. Well, you're not average or possibly middle-class, but you are Solihull. So.
Oh, wow. we spend a lot of... Asad spends a lot of time on this podcast just railing against my middle-classness.
Your middle-classness, now. You're Pakistani.
Yeah.
From,
I'm not middle-class. Yeah.
It does make sense, though, doesn't it, what she says?
No, it does. I mean, at the end of the day, Islamophobia sells papers. Islamophobia gets votes. There are politicians up and down the country. Here in Solihull, you had 2 councillors just a couple of years ago who shared Islamophobic content. Councillors within this council. I went to the council meeting where it was debated and discussed afterwards, and the one and only Muslim councillor, Councillor Ade, forget his surname, African Muslim British councillor stood up in that council chamber and said, I have walked these halls and sat in these chambers with these people, and I did not know that they had such a low opinion of me and my community. Yeah? And his speech was so powerful, moving, touching at that time, and neither of them bothered to even turn up to that council session where this was being discussed. This here in leafy Solihull, but one of the councillors was never suspended. The other one was suspended from the Tory party, Councillor Jeff Potts. They waited for a year and then brought him back in again. So, Baroness Warsi recently called this policy revolving door suspensions, where something comes into the media and it's so bad and so obvious and they've been caught out, so they suspend a councillor, in Staffordshire or Solihull or wherever.
Wait for the heat to die down.
Wait for the heat to die down, and then they're back in again. And this has happened elsewhere. And this is the thing, that in so many prominent positions and places, people are accepting Islamophobia. There was a thing in the House of Lords where a number of MPs, ministers and lords and others included, who went to this event, where one of the guest speakers was Tapan Ghosh. Tapan Ghosh is an Indian right-wing Hindu fundamentalist who said all sorts of really obscene things about Muslims. And he was in the House of Lords at this private function with MPs and lords in attendance. Now, can you imagine, because he's the equivalent of Anjum Chowdhury. Can you imagine Anjum Chowdhury being invited to something like that? And we wouldn't want it. But it's okay for Tapan Ghosh. And this is the sort of thing that we need to think about as a community, and what we can do about it.
Yes. Do you think a lot of this is because this is what Asad was mentioning, is that we've become too easy of a punching bag? Is it that we need to be more robust in our challenging of this, and if so, well, why haven't we done it yet? So one of the things you mentioned about funding sources is that as a community we seem to be very generous in our giving.
Yep.
But yet we have very low funding for most of our Muslim organisations who are doing media work.
I think the figure is somewhere along the lines of £400 million a year that goes from British community here, Muslim community in Britain, to projects abroad. It's a large amount of money, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. But then our community activist organisations here work on a shoestring. So some organisation like the MCB is running on probably £200,000 or £300,000 max, which is coming in from a few funding sources here and there. Yet charity like Islamic Relief is bringing in £100 million a year, mostly for projects abroad. Human Appeal, Penny Appeal, the two or three next rung of the ladder charities, they're taking in £30 million a year. But organisations like MEND, like MABI, like UKIM, like MCB, other organisations which are working on the ground here, if you look at their income streams, I mean, we're talking 50,000, 100,000, 150, 200,000, 300,000, like that. Yeah, it's not enough. Whereas if you look at On the other side, people like the Henry Jackson Society, etc., who are sort of lined up against us, they're in the tens of millions in terms of their funding. So our Muslim organizations may be able to put on 2 or 3 researchers maximum, maybe 4, sort of the most organized Muslim organizations, whereas those guys have 50 or 60 researchers. They can easily send 5 or 6 to go and research a particular Muslim organization, go and troll every single member, every single volunteer's social media posts, all the rest of it, and try to find anything and everything, any skeleton in a cupboard to try to accuse a particular organization of being extreme or something. Whereas on the flip side, we know that they've probably got 1 million skeletons in their cupboards. A lot of these guys are from very extreme right-wing positions. But there is no organisation that's well funded enough within the Muslim community to really be able to challenge those type of things. So I agree with you. I think funding is a big issue within the Muslim community, within our organisations, within local activity, and this goes for lots of other stuff as well. So, in terms of youth work within Britain, in terms of stuff to do with like crime and knife crime and drug abuse and things like this, where is the funding for all of this sort of stuff within the Muslim community? Yeah, it's good that we're sending £400 million to people who are in difficult situations abroad, and I hope we never reduce on that. But at the same time, we've got children in this society, Muslims, who are suffering from knife crime, from drug crime. We've got this big problem with Islamophobia, and there's a big funding gap.
Do you feel as though, because a lot of the donations that come into the big charities, so like the big 5 charities, Islamic Relief, etc., do you feel as though the donors donate to causes that are quite, let's say, PC, so water wells, stuff like that, crises, but when they look at issues of Islamophobia, etc., they see it as inherently political, so they don't want to get involved.
Yeah, and
even though it affects them.
I think people don't understand the importance of that. So there's a big disaster, like you say, abroad, there's a flood somewhere. They see on their news channels, dying children, starving adults, and all houses gone. It's quite simple. They see the solution. I give my £100 and it builds a house for this family, or it feeds that family for a month. It's nice, easy, connectable giving. Whereas if you say to somebody, if you donate your £100, it will go towards lobbying Parliament. It doesn't have the same ring to it for them necessarily, but it should. Lobbying Parliament is so important for us as a community. Holding the media to account is so important for us as a community. Dealing with youth crime in this country is so important for us as a community. We've had several stabbings in Birmingham where Muslims have been involved, either been stabbed or done it recently, and we need to take our youth away from that. Now, where is the money from us as a community to look at that issue? All this demonization of the Muslim community. Where's our pushback? So there's this is part of the thing that as a community we should be funding ourselves better. We should not at any point have to go cap in hand to government to solve our issues. As a community, we have the resources to be able to fund ourselves on this, but we don't. But there's other reasons for this type of Islamophobia.
Do you feel as though big charities are afraid to work with organisations like MEND? Because the sway that a lot of big charities have is quite important.
I mean, the bigger charities, they've got the Charities Commission to think about. They've got political factors, etc. For them to fund political activity in the UK is
not necessarily funding, because that goes against the nature of a charity. But
no, a charity can fund a political activity. It's not a problem, as long as it's that's what they set up to do, and it's all within parameters, etc. The problem is that they will absolutely get slaughtered for it. From the media, from government, from the Charities Commission, that and because anyone who's frontline involved in political work to try to make a better political situation for the Muslim community in Britain is automatically labelled Islamist, regardless of their positioning. So if these charities are funding any of that, they'll probably get similar sort of issues. So we need to have our institutions funded. The community itself needs to think about where it puts its money, and it should definitely look to better fund those organizations on the ground which are doing the work, challenging the narrative that's actually really pushing our community on the back foot all the time. And then as a community, we need to look at the structural changes that need to be made by government, by media, by institutions to make life easier for not just Muslims but minorities in general in this country. So what do I mean by that? For example, currently we've got incitement to racial hatred as a specific offence. We've got a very similar offence called incitement to religious hatred. When it comes to incitement to racial hatred, it's quite strong. You just have to prove that the thing occurred without having to prove intent. So you can't say, "Oh, I didn't intend to do this." If your actions show you did it, you did it. When it comes to the same offence for religious hatred, incitement to religious hatred, you have to prove intent.
It's very hard, isn't it?
It's very, very difficult to prove intent. So I'll give you an example of something that would fall out of this. If somebody went into the streets and held up a sign that said, "No more blacks, no more Jews, no more Sikhs," that would be illegal, because all three are covered under racial hatred legislation. So Jews and Sikhs are considered races for the purposes of legislation. So what's happened is there was case law from which they proved that Sikhs come from a particular part of Punjab in India, that they're similar racially, that they all speak Punjabi, etc. So the law defined them through case law as a racial community. Jews similarly, the fact that they come from Israel originally, etc. So there was a whole lot of things. They looked at it and they said, okay, they're a racial community. There was a similar case law for the Muslim community where a case was taken to court many years ago, and the courts threw it out and said, no, you've got Muslims, you're all from different races, come from all different parts of the world, speak all different languages, so we're not going to consider you as a racial community. But Jews and Sikhs are. So if you held up that sign which said no more blacks, no more Sikhs, no more Jews, that would be considered to be incitement to racial hatred, and it would be an offence. If you held up the same sign saying no more Muslims, it wouldn't, because actually it's very difficult to prove your intent. And there's actual case law on this. So the famous one is Eric Kitson, who was a UKIP councillor from neighbouring Worcester. And he put on social media, a post where he had a pig that was wearing a hat, and the hat said Allah. And he was spit roasting a Muslim dressed in a traditional Muslim garb. And the fire was being fed by Qurans. Yeah, this was like a cartoon that was on his Facebook post. Yeah, he had a separate post which talked about Muslim women that said, "Hang them all first and ask questions later." Now, West Mercia Crown Prosecution Service, who decides whether something should go to be prosecuted or not, decided they couldn't prove intent for incitement to religious hatred, and they didn't take it to court. So that shows you how ridiculous that
and
case.
And stopped there. That case didn't go further.
That's it.
And he's still active and
etc. So my point being is that this is one piece of structural change that we can request as a community. We should be lobbying to say make the incitement to religious hatred equal to the incitement for racial hatred, and remove this requirement for intent, so that all of these social media posts that we see every day, which are clearly inciting religious hatred, we don't have to prove intent anymore. We just say that is inciting religious hatred, so it shouldn't be there. And the flip side of that, people say, oh well, then people are going to be stopped from criticizing Islam, and Islam is religion, and we don't have any issues with people critiquing Islam. It's when they're inciting religious hatred that's a problem. And currently, the Jewish and Sikh communities have that same protection, but it doesn't stop critique of Judaism and Sikhism. So why should it be any different for Islam? So there is a few things like this that could be done, changes that we can ask for, that could actually make a difference. I mean, that's one. Another one is better media regulation. We talked already about the amount of lies the media tells on a daily basis about Islam and Muslims. Well, we had the Levison inquiry, which carried on for
a long time. A very long time.
Now, Lord Levison, out of his inquiry came an independent regulator, Impress, which is completely independent of the media, but none of the media have joined it. They've instead joined something they created called the Independent Press Standards Organization. Just because it has independent in the name doesn't mean it's independent. It's run by the media, and it doesn't do much. But they're not joining Impress. Why aren't they joining Impress? Because they're not being forced to join it. There would have been something called Section 40 within the legislation that would have enforced that they joined the independent regulator. Lo and behold, the then Conservative minister within the coalition government and Conservative ministers since have basically not enacted that one piece of legislation, Section 40 of Leveson, because they don't want to force their friends in the media to have to join an independent media regulator that could fine them up to £1 million for telling lies about communities. Yeah, but that's what we need. We need to be pushing our MPs, our politicians, to enact Section 40 of Leveson, one, and secondly, to have Leveson 2, because Leveson was supposed to be part 1 inquiry and then part 2, which looked further into, how things and implementation and stuff, and that hasn't happened either. So we need to be, as a community, pushing for much better media regulation, and a lot of that can come through the processes that Leveson enacted, but that were never really put into practice.
Do you feel as though, because one argument made against the rise of Islamophobia is, let's talk about pre-9/11, where the main target of the world's anger was towards the communists, for example. So during the Cold War, we had an immense amount of aggression, both on a societal level and on the executive level with governments towards communists. And then when the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet bloc, the target had switched towards the Muslims. Do you feel as though people who say, so some scholars in Oxford, for example, writing on the topic, say that give it another 100 years and the target will switch again, so why don't we just wait it out?
If people had said that to the Jews in the 1930s, and they just said, "Oh, why don't you wait it out?" and then the Holocaust occurred,
yeah,
and you don't know what could happen.
Yeah,
there's no such thing as waiting out. Yeah, I agree. I think that targets change. So here in Britain, like I said, the community, with everybody spying on them, was the African Caribbean community back in the 80s and early 90s. During that period and before that, it was the Irish community. Almost throughout the entire history, the Gypsies were getting it in the neck, and they still are today. Now that's the case, but we can't wait it out, because if you went to New Zealand and said to the New Zealand Muslim community, a few weeks ago, why don't you just wait it out?
So yeah, that's true about New Zealand, but do you think that because I was basically looking at this book that someone's written. It's an American Muslim author, and she's written a book that, it's a fictional book, but it's from the perspective of a girl who's in a Muslim internment camp in the US that has started, and it almost sounds a bit like we're crying wolf, because is it really that bad? Are we really at a level where we can, where something like the Holocaust or even something smaller like what the Americans did to Japanese Americans in what was it? I think it was
1960s, 50s.
Yeah. Do you really think we're at that point, or
okay?
Because it sounds a bit like we're playing the victim card.
After the Holocaust, the first genocide against any community, and the only genocide against any community in Europe since the Holocaust,
was the Bosnians.
Bosnia, yeah, against the Muslims. So it's already happened.
We've
already had.
Some people believe that the Bosnian crisis was primarily ethnically driven because the Albanians that were living in Bosnia and the split of Yugoslavia.
No, we're not talking about Albanians here. We're talking about Bosnia, yeah? So in Bosnia, there's one language spoken, Serbo-Croat, by the Bosnians, by the Serbs, and by the Croats. Mm-hmm. They're ethnically the same community. The only difference they have between the three communities is that one's Roman Catholic, the Croats are. The Serbs are Orthodox Christian, and the Bosnians are Muslim. That's the difference between this.
Well, but weren't the Bosnians made up ethnically primarily of Albanian descent?
No. The Bosnians are not Albanian. The Albanians are a different community altogether, yeah? So the Bosnians are Slavs.
Okay.
They are ethnically the same as the Serbs, ethnically the same as the Croats. Religion is the difference within those communities, and they were attacked because of their religious differences. They were put in concentration camps, and they were killed in those concentration camps. Boys and young men were lined up and shot and thrown into ditches, 10 and 20 deep. And this happened in Europe in the late 20th century, not even in the early 20th century. So that's already happened. Syrian refugees who came through Hungary have currently been caged in external cages in Hungary, where they can't go forward and they can't go back. You've got Donald Trump, who's talking about Muslim bans. These are all the sort of things that that we're talking about are happening. It's not just sort of fictional writing. I mean, you can with respect to the author you're talking about, these things are already happening, and they have happened. And New Zealand, 50 people killed. You had the mosque attack in Quebec in Canada. Again, people died. You've had Finsbury Park attack. We've had in Birmingham Muhammad Salim, who was murdered. The man who murdered him placed 3 bombs outside mosques in Birmingham. I don't know if you've heard of that. A lot of people haven't. The one outside Masjid Aisha in Walsall actually exploded, but alhamdulillah, the guy didn't know his salah times, so it didn't actually injure someone. But there was a nail bomb that exploded outside Masjid Aisha in Walsall. So these things are happening. Just because the media isn't telling people about it doesn't mean it doesn't. I was in Leicester as part of my work, where we had to go and visit the family of Zainab Hussein, who Paul Moore drove over. He hit her with his car, drove up the road, tried to hit a young Somalian girl who he missed. Well, he hit her school bag, but she jumped out the way, came around, and then drove back over Zainab a second time while she was lying on the ground with 2 wheels passing over her pelvis, breaking pelvis, legs, arms. Almost every bone in the body was broken. This is just, a couple of years ago in Leicester, neighbouring city. He said to his brother within a few hours of the attack, I've hit a Paki, and I've done it for the London bombings, and I'm proud of myself. This is quotes from his brother in the court. So it's happening. It's not just this idea that we're crying wolf. But that's disappeared. Nobody can say that with justification anymore. Since 2011, there has been a 400% increase in hate crime, according to Home Office and police statistics. Last year, there was a 40% increase in hate crime. The year before, there was a 35% increase. And the year before that, there was a 33% increase. And 52% of all religiously motivated hate crime is against Muslims in this country. We make up 4.4% of the population, but 52% of all hate crime, religiously motivated hate crime, is against Muslims. That is 10 times the proportion within the population. So this is serious. These are not men figures, Talmama figures, whatever. These are Home Office police figures. Now, if anybody says it's just crying wolf, then they need to really think about what that term means. This is serious stuff.
That's the book, by the way, is called Internment. It's by an author called Samira Ahmed, who lives in the Midwest in the US.
Oh, very nice.
So it's quite a bit of fun for us. But also, so another kind of point carrying on from that is one of the things that you mentioned that the Leicester attacker, he said, I killed a Paki, and one of the things I've heard mentioned to me before is that a lot of the times when those Islamophobes come up and they say, I think Muslim, go back to your country, something like that, it's often just a placeholder because they can't say Paki, so they just say Muslim. Do you think there's an aspect of it that we are, that as a society, like as even as a Muslim community, because we are actually open to, this is the thing, Islam is something that can be accepted by any race or any people, and we have probably, I don't know what the ratio is, but I think it's about 5 or 10% of Muslims in this country are converts. Do you think there's an argument to be made that we should give them more of a leading role?
The converts.
Or is that just feeding into...
I feel as though it might aggravate the situation a bit more. Like actually going out and putting the spotlight on converts unnaturally.
I mean, personally, more than that, I'm really against anything of that nature. Simply just, look, I don't believe in racializing within our community. We should see ourselves as one. We should see ourselves as a community.
As the Muslims.
Whoever's the best person for the job should be up to do it, yeah? And we shouldn't pander to people's prejudices, where they prefer to see a white face over a brown face, over a black face, whatever, yeah? We shouldn't pander to any of those prejudices, whether it's employment, whether it's in spokespeople, whatever. The best person for the job should do it. And I think any type of pandering to races just shouldn't be done, full stop. If there's a sister in niqab, who's the most qualified person to be a media spokesperson, she should be the media spokesperson, finished. Whether she's black, if she's brown, whatever, that's the person that's right for it. So, for example, in MEND, we've got Azhar Qayum, who's our Wales regional manager, who's one of our media spokespeople, and she's very eloquent, comes across really well. Really,
and she wears niqab.
She wears a niqab, very powerful. She's niqab wearing, but she's climbs up and down mountains, did the 3-peak challenge in 24 hours, goes skydiving, real inspiration, yeah? And she's Saudi to boot, which is quite interesting. And drives a car.
Well, that's not controversial anymore, so.
Well, we see the percentage of Saudi women that are driving even now, yeah? But the thing is, that's it. And so what if she's Asian, Saudi, and wears niqab? That's part of who she is, but she's also got a master's in genetics. So you take the person with all their abilities and say this is the right person for the job. You don't look at anything beyond that.
Interesting. I wanted to speak about you talking about the comment that Thaqib made about pushing reverts to the forefront of our media campaigns. I'd feel as though, if you'd agree with me, that whether or not you pander to the Islamophobes or you try to work against them, you will still get the same responses, because if you do attempt to put, for example, white reverts in front of the cameras to show that Islam is quite an ethnically diverse religion, they will start coming up with arguments saying stuff like, they really are taking over now, because in the New Zealand attackers memorandum, his 78-page one, he spoke about the invaders coming.
Yeah, and he said he doesn't. He went to these countries and he doesn't mind them, and then he dislikes people, immigrants who come to this country, and then he hates. And he said, I don't hate any of them. I hate in particular those people who are white and have basically they've been treacherous to our race. And become Muslim.
Again, I on both sides, I say don't pander to them. If you've got a white revert who is the best person for the job, they should do the job. Whether that's a spokesperson, whether they should be at the forefront of that one. There are people like Yusuf Chambers and others who white reverts who do an amazing job on this type of stuff, yeah. And they should be the ones who are at the forefront of taking our message to out there. Not because he's white, not because he's a revert, but because he's eloquent and he knows what he's saying.
So that people like Jamal Howard,
and Jamal Howard, and all these other people, yeah, Daniel Hakikatu, and so many other people who really, you know what they're saying, and they're eloquent. So people like Suhaib Webb and others. Not because on the same side, Yasir Qadi does a great job, and so we shouldn't be looking at and racially profiling within our community at all in any way.
A very interesting thing about your opinion, your point of view, is that you completely throw the idea of some kind of racial barrier outside, and this is an inherently Islamic idea that we look at communities from their faith. This hadith of Prophet ﷺ from his last khutbah, he talks about the importance of Iman and the God consciousness over the colour of your skin.
Yeah.
So I think it's a benefit for the Muslims, a strength of the Muslims. However, I don't really think we can utilise that in any way, positive or negative, for Islamophobia.
I mean, look, it is a strength. And actually, the positive of it is this: that why does this guy hate the revert more than anything else?
Yeah,
he hates the revert because this is proving that Islam is not a foreign religion. Islam is not an imported religion. That Islam is part of humanity. That we've always had European Islam. Spain was a Muslim country for 800 years. Southern Italy and Sicily and Malta were Islamic for centuries. Islam was in Bosnia for centuries. Islam was in Albania for centuries. There is an indigenous Polish Muslim community that has been there for centuries. the famous gates of Vienna that they talk about, the Battle of Vienna, where the Austro-Hungarians fought against the Turks, and these guys talk about and he spoke about it as well, and how it was the Muslims versus the Christians. Well, the Turkish Muslim army had Armenian and Georgian Christians fighting within it, and the Western Christian army had Tatar Muslims who were fighting on their side. So actually it's not as simple as that. Muslims have been on both sides of all sorts of these equations so many times. First World War, Muslims were on both sides. Second World War, Muslims were on both sides, and Christians were on both sides. So this has never been the case that Muslims are some sort of an external figure that has been invading and conquering or whatever. We've been here. We live here in the West Midlands. Have you guys heard of Offa's coin? The most famous Mercian. So this was the king. The whole of the Midlands was the kingdom of Mercia back in the Middle Ages. So we're talking over 1,000 years here, before William the Conqueror. And the most famous of the Mercian kings was King Offa. Now, prior to King Offa, no English kings had minted their own coins. So we had Roman coins when the Romans ruled here, but between that period there was no English. King Offa minted his own coins. Now Offa's coins are available now. You can see them in the museums. There's, I think, a surviving coin there. On the one side it says La ilaha illallah in Arabic, King Offa's coin. Now why is it that a Mercian king has got coins minted with the kalima written on them? Now there's all sorts of things that people throw out, was he Muslim or one of his ministers Muslim, all this sort of stuff.
Merlin was the Muslim one.
You can go wherever you want with this, but at the end of the day, clearly there was that connection between Islam and Muslims and Britain and the Midlands 1,000 years ago. Forget about Europe, yeah. So Islam has not been the outsider. Muslims have not been the outsiders, and even Christianity, the sort of majority faith of Europeans, came from Palestine.
Yeah,
So, the Middle Eastern faiths are not an unknown thing in Britain. I mean, Jesus wasn't born in sort of St. Albans and crucified in Birmingham.
I think Christianity has been kind of Anglophiled quite a bit in terms of depictions of Jesus by Leonardo DiCaprio, making him white, etc.
I mean, look, even Islam has an Islamic custom. Not Islam, the religion, but Islamic custom has indigenized in many parts of the Muslim world, where local customs are part of the local Islamic custom and culture and stuff. So that's not an issue. But Islam as a religion, as a concept, is not sort of Middle East centered or Pakistan centered.
But I feel as though there has been a certain push in terms of Christianity to make it Eurocentric over the years compared to Islam. So that is probably one of the reasons why.
But you've got the center of Islamic empire for several hundred years was Turkey, in Istanbul, the seat of the Eastern Roman Empire. European Muslims ruling over a vast empire in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Yeah, that spread all the way into the Balkans. So it beggars belief. These sort of arguments. You had the 800 years of Muslim Spain. Now there's so much inherent European culture that went into that as well. So it doesn't make sense. I mean, people like Hamza Yusuf and Suhaib Webb and these guys can hardly be accused of being Pakistanis or Africans or whatever. And this comes back to the point we're talking about. The reason why these Islamophobes really hate revert so much is because that revert is proving that Islam is a religion for humanity and not just for Pakistanis and Bengalis and Arabs, yeah, and that's the thing, and we should celebrate this, that Islam is a religion for humanity, for the whole world. And from the very early days of Islam, there was white, black, brown, Chinese, so many different Muslims from the very early days. The masjid in Guangzhou in China, that's still there today, was established by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu. So within 40 years of the death of Rasulullah, the Suhaib al-Rumi, the companion of the Prophet was European. Bilal radiallahu anhu was black African from Ethiopia. Within a generation, Islam was in the Caucasus, Islam was in Central Asia, Islam was in China, Islam was in Africa, Islam was in Europe. And from the beginning, and Islam was in places like Malaysia. Now, some of that was through Muslim empires increasing, but loads of it was through trade. And so, like along the western coast of India and Kerala and these places, Islam got there way before the arrival of the Mughals. Malaysia became Muslim through trade. Indonesia became Muslim through trade. There's 100 million Muslims in China, yet no Muslim army has ever invaded China. 100 million Muslims. That's more than the population of the whole of the Arab Peninsula in China. And if you go to China and you see the mosques, they're like, wow, what happened here? You go in, there's vast compounds in places like Guangzhou and Shaanxi and places like this, vast compounds. And you come in and it's open air with pagodas and Chinese architecture and Islamic calligraphy written in Chinese and stuff, yeah? And all Chinese Muslims that look no difference from the Chinese outside. So this is Islam, it's all over the world. It's within every culture. It's within every race. And that's the thing that Islamophobes don't get, that Islam is not external to any culture, or any society.
I wanted to kind of ask more, globally, right-wing extremism has been on the rise, and we see this in, countries like India, where, and it's also, because a lot of the points you made are that, thinking that Islam versus Christianity is which doesn't exist, like it's not a battle, thinking that it's it's been a battle for like 500 years between, the Christian Europe, and it's irrational. But a lot of this kind of fake news type mentality, we've seen it in India as well with the rise of the far right, and Brazil. So globally, there seems to be a huge rise of the far right. And how do we fit in to that? But also, what do you think is contributing to that globally?
There is an Islamophobia industry out there, and this is clear. Lots of people have researched into the money that's going behind this. So some of it's disconnected to each other, but a lot of it's connected. So places like Western Europe, Eastern Europe especially, there's lots of Islamophobic money, specific money by Islamophobic institutes from America, which is pouring into Eastern Europe, which is pouring into Britain, including into all sorts of think tanks and newspapers and other things which are pouring out this Islamophobic narrative. And the same is happening with South America. India is slightly different. Definitely those Islamophobes are meeting each other. So Tapan Ghosh came here and met with right-wing extremists from Britain, and similar stuff happens where there's like this whole bro-love between Modi and Trump, and that's going on, and all of this sort of stuff. There's lots of intermingling and interaction and stuff. But it's one of the things one of you guys, I think Asad said earlier, was that it's an easy target, Islam and Muslims. So, and it's a vote winner. If you can rile up your community and say, these Muslims are about to take over, look, they've done this bombing there, that bombing there, they're all terrorists, they're all after your women, they're all of this sort of stuff, yeah?
It's very, very good for winning campaigns, isn't it? Elections.
I mean, if you can...
Are you thinking of running?
I am thinking of running for my constituency.
If you can scare... Fear wins elections. If you can scare a community, one of the things that happened recently with this whole Balakot and things like this between India and Pakistan was that a lot of commentators were saying that Modi was going to lose this election. Hopefully he's still going to lose it, but they were saying that he's going to lose this election. Then what happens is you have an incident in Kashmir where 40 Indian soldiers and paramilitary die. Modi sends planes over to bomb Pakistan, where
bomb some trees.
I was going to say where 5 or 6 trees became shaheed on the Pakistani side. Yeah, Allah yarhamu.
Well, the Pakistanis took it to UN for eco-terrorism.
Eco-terrorism, I know. I find this hilarious. I think Jeremy McLennan pointed it out a few days ago. So I mean, come on, it was a joke. They sent bombers into Pakistan. They bombed some open air territory and a couple of trees and stuff. Then Pakistanis sent a raid into India in which an Indian jet fell out of the skies. But it's been spun in India as a victory. we bombed Pakistan, we showed them, Suddenly Modi's rising high in the polls again. And this is the thing that, the fear of the Muslim, the fear of this imminent Muslim invasion. I mean, if you look at the disparity, Pakistan has a population of about 200 million, India has a population of about 1.1 something million. Indian armed forces are twice the size of Pakistani armed forces. They've got a navy which is double the size. They've got an air force which is double the size. There's no way Pakistan's going to...
And he called me a Pakistani seller. How can you say this stuff about the army? It's unacceptable.
There's no way that Pakistan is going to launch an invasion into India or has any interest of doing anything of the sort. But the feeling that you get if you watch the Indian media, anybody who understands Urdu or even English, you can watch NDTV and stuff like this. Yeah, if you watch the Indian media, there is this constant barrage of media attention that's saying that there's an imminent invasion of Mother India by Pakistan, yeah, and it's that heightened sense of fear and what have you that is getting people like Modi into power. And this is the thing that politicians across the world have learned, that if there's one community that you can attack and get away with it, that you're not going to be pulled up at the UN, you're not going to be pulled up by international agencies or anything like that, is the Muslim community. Why? Because they're all doing it. Trump can't hold India to account for maligning its Muslim community when he's doing it himself. Even Muslim countries are getting in on the act. So you've got senior figures from the United Arab Emirates telling European countries to deal with their Muslim minorities, as if
keep your Muslims in check.
It's a joke. It really is.
So one of the things about Islamophobia, and I've heard this as a criticism of when we go out campaigning against Islamophobia, is that Muslims should be focusing on wider issues. So where is the Muslim or MAB or MEND campaign against, for example, the privatization of the NHS? And why are we not focused on issues that affect the wider community? Why are we so obsessed with only, Islamophobia or other things that affect Muslims only?
Well, nobody asked Amnesty International why they're not focusing on the privatization of the NHS. Yeah, nobody asked Human Rights Watch. Nobody asked Human Rights Watch why they're not concentrating on the lack of funding for schools. Yeah, MEND is an organisation that's set up for Islamophobia.
You have certain remits.
We have a remit. As an organisation, we're an organisation that is there to fight Islamophobia. That's the headline. That's our spheres and parameters. There are people within the Muslim community who do those other things. You've got here MAB within Birmingham with their Believe in Good, Do Good campaign, doing street cleans and stuff. You've got Muslim community organisations like As-Sufa and others in Birmingham city centre feeding homeless people almost every day of the week. Green Lane Mosque, housing homeless people. So yeah, Muslim community is involved in all sorts of different things. Islamic Relief were the first people on the ground in I've forgotten the name, one of the local Midlands towns here, which was flooded. And during the floods a few years ago, with water for the locals because they didn't have clean water. So Muslim community is involved in all sorts of things in this country and all sorts of campaigns that we've been at the forefront of on so many occasions. But doesn't mean any particular individual organisation can do any of those things. We're set up for particular remits and we fulfil those.
Okay. One of the things about Islamophobia, because obviously you've been working for many years with MEND or working on Islamophobia in various capacities from the 90s till now. One of the questions is, this New Zealand mosque attack.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, this was like Muslims were the victims here,
yeah.
So it wasn't like the media was attacking us. It wouldn't even be justified. But do you think the response has been better than the past? So actually, this time, a few media outlets did call it terrorism, compared to in the past where it's been very limited, or it's always been called a mass shooting. Do you think it's been better this time, or more of the same? Because the BBC did call it a mass shooting.
Marginally, in the British press. But they got over it very quickly. I think New Zealand has been different. New Zealand press, New Zealand government, etc., have really run with this and continued running with it. Our media got over it very quickly. Did you see the social media pictures with the New Zealand flags highlighted, stand with New Zealand. Did you see them everywhere?
Where you can change your profile, you can't see that.
No, did I?
They weren't there.
They weren't there, yeah?
I actually tried looking for it as well.
Yeah, and it didn't...
Or on Facebook.
Where you can change your profile picture.
There was a number... I went on a social media profile of somebody who basically was saying, why are we still going on about this, about like the next day, yeah? I went on his profile, and his profile picture still had the French flag on it.
Yeah.
From Stand with France from like a year ago, yeah? So I think that this is the thing. When it's attacks on Muslims like this, they disappear very quickly in the media. The big insight stuff isn't looked at. So yeah, that first day people make a few nice statements and stuff. But what about the structural stuff? I mean, look, somebody can even stuff like wearing hijab and in solidarity and stuff. I'm for that. That's fine. It's good. But wearing hijab in solidarity in one day is fine. But what's more important is ensuring that sisters with hijab are not discriminated against on a daily basis. Those sisters who actually wear hijab on a daily basis aren't discriminated. So those sort of structural things. If there's a Muslim who commits an act of terrorism, every last reason that could have led him into doing that or her doing that is looked into, and legal changes are made, and prevent duties are enacted, and all sorts of new laws come in. Yet all of these different attacks have happened on Muslims one after another. And where are those things? Where are those structural enactments? Like the little few things that I was talking about better media regulation, about having incitement to religious hatred treated like incitement to religious hatred. Having materials about Islamophobia going into British schools, so that people at a young age are taught that Muslims are perfectly normal human beings, just like everybody else, and that they shouldn't be hated. So all these sort of things, yeah. Political parties accepting a proper definition of Islamophobia, so that when their members fall foul of it, they can exclude them, so that they don't do it again. All of these sort of structural changes haven't happened.
They're quite on the top, aren't they? Just rounding up the top.
All that happens is everybody makes these nice.
I think we've
statements.
become, as a Muslim community, we've become very pacified with statements of politicians like Jacinda Ardern saying, "Well, she has done a lot of good work, as the Prime Minister should." She's not going to come out and say,
"But we hope
it was a great attack." But she has to. It's her job. But we have to look deeper into
what are they doing. Even in New Zealand, will there be law changes? Will the Muslim community be better defended in law? Will there be stuff against discrimination at the workplace? So, for example, here in Britain, National Equality Panel said, there was some BBC research where they said that somebody with a Muslim name and somebody with a non-Muslim name, the Muslim would be 3 times less likely to be called for interview after they sent their CVs in.
I read that one.
I've got friends who've actually tried it with their own CV, just change the name, and it actually works.
All the time. 3 times is a massive number, so any one of you can try it and it'll work, yeah? So, so why can't we have name-blind CVs? For example, and things like this. Now, those are real stuff that people can do, which is far better than wearing a hijab for a day or making a nice statement saying I stand with the Muslim community and we stand in solidarity and whatever. Yeah, that stuff. So even going forward, even with New Zealand, even with all the love that we have for the New Zealand Prime Minister for everything she's done so far, yeah, we want to see a lot of this stuff. We want to see, will they enact legislation that ensures that going forward that Muslims aren't discriminated against, that hate against Muslims is acted upon and quickly. Now, will they do it? And also here in Britain, will they do it?
I think that's quite an important point, because especially with Jacinda Ardern, a lot of the Muslim community have become pacified by the work she's been doing after the attack. However, we haven't looked at her policies beforehand as well. So her anti-immigration policies are aligning with the New Zealand First Party, who a lot of these far right, essentially fascist MPs.
I thought Jacinda was quite.
No,
Jacinda's
I say her name like she's my
what else is this saying is the case? Part of the war on terror. Part of the
generally,
maintaining her troops in Iraq.
So look, that was before. There's been this moment of reality striking in New Zealand. New Zealand as a country generally is supposed to be quite a liberal country. New Zealanders generally are not known for the racism and things like this. Yeah, so it's no Australia, let's say. Yeah. But let's see. They've had all these beautiful public statements and stuff like this. Let's see what happens going forward. Because for me, though I'll accept them on face value when they make these type of statements, but then I want to see the action that goes on behind it. Now,
they have banned guns, semi-automatic.
Banning guns is a good thing, but that's for their society in general. I'm talking about the Muslim-specific stuff, around discrimination, all this sort of stuff that really needs to come in to ensure that the type of media narrative that led to this doesn't happen. And that needs to happen even more so in places like Australia and other places where it's even worse. But even in New Zealand, those things should be put in place so that Muslim community is no longer demonized in the way that it currently is.
Do you think this boils down to how loud the voice of the Muslims is? Because if you look at Australia, it's quite a big place, but there's not a huge amount of people in the land. But it's quite misrepresented for the Muslim community. Like, you got a lot of senators. Like, for Senator Anning, for example, he had 9 Senate votes just to get into power as a senator. 9 votes. But then you don't have any representation for the Muslim community on that level. So do you think it's an issue of we can make the change, but we need someone to say, let's make change?
Representation is a huge thing. So, look, we've talked about a lot about what others can do. There is stuff that the Muslim community can do. We should stop thinking about just becoming doctors and dentists and telling our children to become doctors.
That's a dangerous thing to say. That's a dangerous thing to say.
Doctors, dentists and lawyers, yeah?
Everyone just tuned off and just turned it off.
We need to get our next generation into the media. We need to make sure that they're journalists. We need to get them into politics, into the political field. We need to get them into civil service, local and national. And you can make a real difference in those places. So on the one hand, there's lots railed against us, but on the other hand, as a community, what are we doing to make sure that we are in the places that the decisions are made, that we are in the places that ideas are formulated? We should be going into these fields. We should be going to research. We should be going into university research. We should be all of these sort of things where. As a community, we are no longer we're no longer just the subject of dialogue, but we're the ones who are setting the agenda for the dialogue, and that's really important.
I think that's really important as
well. I think that's a really good kind of point to end for the future. Is we should tell people to focus on fields like media, try to diversify fields of authority where they'll actually be able to enact real change. Jazakallah khair. It's been brilliant. We look forward to having you on again as a guest, inshallah. For Mend, you can reach out to Mend on their Facebook pages.
So we're at Mend Community on Facebook and Twitter, and our website is mend.org.uk. And you can download our app. We've got an app on both Apple and
Android.
I don't like Android, so I never remember the name. But
you just pointed at me on my Android.
App on both. You can download, inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. And you can email us at middlewestpc@gmail.com. You can follow us on @the Middle West PC on Twitter and our Facebook pages, The Middle West Podcast. You could listen to this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube. Actually, we're uploading to YouTube now, as well as Podcast Addict.
But you won't be able to see our beautiful faces just yet.
No, not just yet. But we will get around.
Want
to
the big reveal?
Just as well.
We've got the faces for radio, like they say.
Yeah, and that's why we stick to podcasting. But Jazakumullah khair for tuning in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.